Suddenly you are wide awake. It is still dark outside, so you wonder for a second why. The room seems to get warmer, your hands start to shake, you can't think straight. You can't focus on the time flashing from your phone screen. You barely feel like you have the energy to get out of bed. Your blood sugar is low. You draw blood from your finger and the meter reads at 50, 70 points below where it should be. You reach for some glucose tablets that are sitting on your bedside table, eat them as fast as you can, and wait silently for your blood sugar to rise to a normal level, knowing that you cannot safely go back to sleep until it does. Can you imagine having this happen to you during the night, during class, while driving, while exercising? For someone living with type 1 diabetes, this is normal. So, what is this disease that you always hear about around school? Type 1 diabetes is an autoimmune disease in which your pancreas stops producing insulin. Your immune system attacks and destroys the insulin-producing beta cells in the pancreas that release insulin whenever you eat to convert your food into energy. For someone who is not living with type 1 diabetes, your pancreas automatically provides this insulin to convert the carbs you eat into energy, therefore keeping your blood sugar levels within a normal range. All of that information may sound confusing, but to put it in simple terms, people with type 1 diabetes have to perform the functions that the pancreas should be doing for them. So, what does someone living with type 1 diabetes have to do in order to stay alive? Every time I want to eat, exercise, sleep, or really do anything, I need to check my blood sugar by pricking my finger. The picture here is ideally where I want to be, about 120. But since I cannot properly mimic an organ, it doesn't always work out this way. The perfect range for me is between 80 and 150, but it can fall too low, which is what was described in the first slide, or too high. When my blood sugar is low, I feel dizzy, hungry, tired, and unfocused. When my blood sugar is high, I get weak, thirsty, and don't want to eat anything. On average, I check my blood sugar 6 to 8 times a day. Another part of diabetes is having to manually give insulin for everything you eat. There are 2 ways to do this, either through an insulin shot, which is up there, or through something called an insulin pump, which is what I have. The insulin pump allows you to only have to change your pump site every 3 days instead of giving yourself a shot 6 to 10 times a day. This pump is filled with insulin that travels through a tube and then to a cannula, which goes just underneath the skin. It's kind of like an IV that you would get at the hospital. This pump site can be placed basically anywhere in the leg, the stomach, the arm, etc. Even though there are many more parts to this disease, these are the basic components. Oh, and the one little fact that there's no cure. If you are diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, you will live with it for the rest of your life. It's not something you grow out of, and it's not something you can ignore. Most people assume that these are the worst parts about living with this disease. The needles, the blood, the little forever part, but it's not. The worst part, for me at least, is the ignorance about the disease. When you look up diabetes on a search engine, this is what comes up. Many people think that type 1 and type 2 diabetes are the same thing, that people like me brought this disease upon themselves because we ate too much sugar and didn't properly take care of ourselves. Even though this isn't necessarily true for people living with type 2 diabetes either. Even though organizations like JDRF have provided so much useful technology to make living with this disease easier, they still do not know what causes someone to get type 1 diabetes. Despite what many people believe, I can eat anything I want as long as I give insulin. As a kid, I would go to birthday parties and not get offered a cookie because they just assumed that I couldn't eat one. I got told that eating donuts would just make me fatter. And even though I knew that these comments weren't true, they still had a really big impact on me and continue to have an impact on many people living with type 1 diabetes. Before someone is diagnosed with type 1 by their doctor, a person has very distinct symptoms related with type 1, yet still go undiagnosed for quite some time. When I was diagnosed, my blood sugar was above 900, 800 points above where it should have been. As a result, at age 10, I lost almost 30 pounds in 6 months. This was because my body was working so hard to get rid of the excess sugar. Even though this happens on accident when a child doesn't know that they have type 1 yet, some manipulate their insulin in order to quickly lose weight on purpose. This is called diabulimia. And I have seen the influence that comments like donuts will just make them fatter have on people. The misconception that simply eating too much sugar causes diabetes influenced my body image and that I felt I had something to prove. Megan is a friend of mine who went through this and is now a freshman at Georgia Tech. This topic can be so hard to explain, but I feel the way Megan puts it is perfect. You feel like you have to prove people wrong by not looking like the images that people find online. I've met so many people living with type 1 diabetes who have had the same problem with body image because of how the world views it. I've seen them struggle and fight and win the battle, but it's not a battle that I want them to have to fight. For a long time, I didn't want to talk about type 1 diabetes. Sure, I encouraged people to go to the walk to find a cure, but I never actually told people what it was, especially this part. Part of me thinks the reason that I never wanted to talk about it was because I didn't want to be defined by my diabetes. And the other part didn't want people's pity. I didn't want people to feel bad because of all the things I had to do to stay alive. But you know what I've realized? That doesn't do me or anyone living with type 1 any good. How am I supposed to be the change? How am I supposed to change the way that people think about type 1 and help prevent the insecurity that some people feel if I don't help? I'm not going to stand up here and pretend that I haven't gone through moments where I've hated this disease. As cliche as it sounds, I know that it's made me the person I am today, but it hasn't been easy. I've lost too many friends to this disease already, and I owe it to them, to every person who's struggled through diabulimia, to every person who has lost a child, to every person thriving with this disease, to try and change the way the world sees it. And that's really why I'm up here talking, because now every person in this room knows about type 1 and can help change the way other people see it too. And I know there will always be TV shows and movies and pictures online that get it wrong. There will always be people that make ignorant comments about my disease. But if by doing this talk, I'm able to educate all of you, and you in turn can educate others, then it's all worth it in the end. Thank you.